All right. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate your willingness to take some time with us this morning. Um, Wanted to maybe start with, obviously, you and I know each other well, worked together for several years at the NCAA, but why don't you tell the audience kind of what your career path was and walk us through how you've gotten to be in your position as the commissioner of the America East.
Yeah, it's probably started when I was a kid. I've always loved sports for as long as I can remember playing them and watching them. And then, you fast forward through high school and once you get to college and start to think about what are you going to do for the rest of your life, as if you can figure that out when you're 18 or 22 years old. I started, become familiar with sport management programs. That was something that was popping up a little bit at different colleges, universities across the country, not certainly to the extent that it is today. But that's really what drove me to selecting where I went to undergrad, which is the University of Wisconsin La Crosse. And it just seemed to me like so natural to stay connected to sports once I realized, even if I didn't know really what it meant, that you could have a career in sports. I played softball in college. The Division III school was UW La Crosse, and I had a great opportunity to be on the Division III National Student Athlete Advisory Committee, which really opened my eyes to the world of collegiate sports and NCAA governance. And I just like fell in love with it, quite honestly. And through that experience, had a chance to network with some good people and ended up with an internship at the Big East Conference. And from there, it's just sort of fell into place for me through since then. So I've been really fortunate all along the way, but it really started with what I think a lot of people have, both who played sports and even just who are fans of sports, like a deep love for sports. And then being a collegiate athlete, I think that really opened my eyes to what the platform that college sports has, the unique sort of intersection of higher education and sports. And I just knew I wanted to be a part of that and have been really fortunate to have opportunities to keep me connected to that world.
You mentioned the experience with the SAC, and obviously over time, at least in the Division I world, in the world we work in, the voice of the student athlete has probably grown over time since you were on SAC. Can you talk a little bit about your experience on SAC and kind of what it did for you in terms of solidifying your interest in this, and how have you seen the student athlete's voice kind of grow over time?
Yeah, I think I think I was probably 19, or I was about 20 or 21 years old, I think, when I started on the NCAA Division III SAC, and just getting exposed to, the myriad of rules and process that the NCAA has, much of which, the bones and structure are still the same and consistent across three divisions, even though we've had a governance restructure. There's still committees, there's still legislative process, and there might be different steps along the way, but learning the fundamentals at such a young age or early stage, or rather in my collegiate career, gave me a really good foundation to, I think, understand and see it from a different point of view, rather than just the softball student athlete who saw maybe this rule or that rule come down. I had a chance to sit at the table with, NCAA staff and other athletics directors and conference commissioners, Division III, and understand their perspective and really see that they were in it for the same reasons as us, trying to make good decisions and be, good stewards of the collegiate experience. And I see those same parallels in Division I. One of the unique experiences I had in Division III, and it's great to see that Division I in the last few years has adopted that. I think even the previous structures, they had student athlete representatives at the highest levels, whether it was in Division III at the Management Council, and I had the good fortune to serve as a student athlete rep to the Division III Management Council when I was on the D3 SAC, and so that was just a unique experience, even compared to being on the SAC itself, where you have to really come prepared and present the viewpoint of the student athletes, but certainly understand and appreciate the perspectives that the institutions were facing. So, seeing that now today in Division I, I think most committees in the Division I structure, I should know that probably better, have student athlete representatives. And I just think that it provides such a unique perspective and enriches the conversation. Even just seeing it at the convention, seeing the student athlete representatives speak up on that association-wide vote, people were listening, and you could see a reaction or hear a reaction and see a reaction from the entirety of the Division 1, 2, and 3 membership, that's really powerful. And I think seeing the impact that had as a student athlete now on the administrative side, just underscores the importance of having student athletes always involved to the extent that you can, in some of these decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point about the recent session for sure. Um, so you had an internship at the Big East. You're now the commissioner of the America East, worked at the NCAA. Have you always kind of been geared more towards the either regional through a conference office or national through the national office kind of policy piece of this? Is that kind of where you knew you wanted to be, or did you have the same struggles that I think a lot of people have in trying to determine, do I go to campus, do I go do the national office or a conference office? Those environments are very different. So, yeah, did you always think you wanted to do the conference piece?
That like the conference to the national office was always where I started from, and I think getting exposure to the national part of it by being on SAC, honestly, and seeing what the NCAA staff did was really interesting and attractive to me. But like most things in life, like I wanted to make sure I wasn't biased by just my first experience. And so in my internship at the Big East, that was a great experience, but it was a 1 year, 10-month gig, and I had to find a job after that. And it's not easy finding a job even back then. And so I applied for a number of jobs and a few conferences. There's just not a lot of conference jobs, particularly back then, and on campus. And I interviewed on campus a little bit, and some things didn't work out. And some things, gave me a chance to see what it would be like day to day on campus. And just working with the campus folks by being even an intern, I sort of sense that that's just not where I would be most successful. And so by hook or crook or by luck, I ended up with a full-time position at the Missouri Valley Conference, and since then I've only stayed at the conference and national office level. But I do think my interactions with campus people and knowing myself, I think being self-aware and knowing your strengths and your limitations is really important. I think I had a good sense of that early on, and so just never found myself to a campus. There, campus people do incredible things, particularly in compliance. It's a really difficult job, as I think campus jobs in just about every department are really difficult. The time, dealing with coaches and student athletes it's a different management of time and structure of your day than in a conference office and national office. And I've just always really enjoyed this, while having some hesitation about knowing how successful, and really not just successful personally, but how effective I could be on a campus. And I just always thought that I would be more effective and my skills better used in a conference and national office perspective. So, who knows, maybe I go to campus one day and I'd really love it, but I've just never had that draw and pull like a lot of people do. And like I said, I think they do great work, and the people that are on campus are, saints, especially in the compliance world. I still think that today. And maybe I just don't look at myself as a saint.
Yeah, well, and you and I have talked about this over the years. I mean, I feel much the same way you just described, and having had a short stint on campus, confirmed that more than anything. And my time at the national office was good, and kind of feel most comfortable with where I am on the conference side. Maybe switching gears a little bit, talk about kind of what you've seen over the years, probably both at the NCAA and as the commissioner in terms of responsibility for hiring young professionals into this business, young professionals looking to make a move. What have you kind of learned over the years that are the most critical skill sets or attributes that make us successful in college sports as professionals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one that I mentioned earlier, being self-aware, I think that's really important. And I understand that when you're coming out of college or early in your years, and even at, over 40 as I am today, you never really fully figure yourself out. And life is an evolution and growing process, and you should always be growing, I believe. But starting to get a good handle on sort of your fundamentals and who you are, I think is important. And until you do that, I think it's great to keep exploring and not limit yourself by position or region of the country if you can. And I know there are limitations sometimes for people's personal situations, but to be open to so many things that I think will helps me figure out who I was as a person, who I was as a like how I worked, what type of people I like to work around, what type of organization I like to be in. All of those things, you know, you learn something hopefully at every step along the way. And even if you stay in the same place, I hope that you're still learning and find ways to keep learning, even if it seems like you can't. There's always something to learn, I think, every day in life. And so that's something to be really important. The self-awareness, I think being curious always is important. Working in college athletics, I do think you have to have a passion for not just the entertainment side of what we do, but the backbone of what we do, which is educating student athletes and being committed to, you know, the higher education and in athletics model. I do think that's really important, particularly today, as it's such a competitive industry to people outside of to people outside of the norm, if you will, because they see lots of dollar signs, especially in Division I, or they see media rights and they see all these things, and they think it's fun and cool because they're a sports fan and they love sports. Well, there's billions of sports fans in this world. That doesn't mean they're suited for working in college athletics. And so what I advise people is you got to be able to communicate your passion for what makes college sports unique, because it's not the same as working in the professional side here in the States or, you know, globally. There's lots of great opportunities out there for people that want to do that and who just love sports. But I believe you have to have a passion for college sports, and it's very different. It might seem similar to some people, but to me, it's very distinct. Those are the things I think are most important, just for college sports, like the understanding, the fundamental understanding of what we do, a self-awareness and curiosity. You know, there are all the other things like having good work ethic, being willing to be a team player. You know, those are, to me, you know, those are transferable across industry. But that's what I advise young people, particularly getting into this business, because there's so many different ways you can go. With so many people probably talking in your ear about go do this, go do that. You know, figure out who you are, what you like to do, and then pursue it, and don't get caught up in what your peers are doing or what your colleagues are doing, because I think that's usually a race to somewhere where, unless it's your passion, it's not going to end well.
Yeah. So what are some of the mistakes or a mistake that you've seen young people make? All right. So what mistakes have you seen young professionals make as they get into this business?
I think it's not being like what I just talked about, being self-aware, being curious, and having the passion and understanding of college athletics. But I also think one thing that I've observed people lacking sometimes is patience, and that's patience for you know, working on a project and moving through it too quickly because, you know, they just think it's either not important or they think that it's right. And then in the you know, zooming out a little bit, it's patience for what comes next from a positional standpoint. I think ambition is good, and we've talked about that, Brad. I mean, they're especially when we're at the national office thinking about like what was going to be next for us someday. And I think that's really healthy. It's motivating to aspire for more or aspire to a leadership position. But I do think that comes with time. There's a reason why, you know, CEOs or commissioners or athletics directors are generally of a certain age. And I've been lucky that I got this job honestly a lot sooner than I thought. But I still like to think I was patient in how I approached everything that came before that. And there's a lot to be learned from observing people, and whether you're an intern or an assistant director like I was, moving up to director or whatever, there's so much to be learned in those positions from both the subject matter expertise, which I think that's where maybe some people get impatient. They think they learn the subject matter really well. And there's some really bright and talented people who can process things and digest it really quickly. But it's all of the other things that make, to me, a good manager, a good leader. And that's working with people, working through conflict, And that was so great about, and what I really appreciate about my time at the national office, because I just didn't have exposure to managing other people and managing other teams and working through conflict. And you don't pick that up by reading a book or reading an HBR article or listening to a podcast. You can certainly get some good lessons, but until you have to confront that and, deal with that and talk to a colleague who might even be a friend and work through a hard issue because maybe they're underperforming, or trying to manage or navigate a really important issue with your presidents, or even just with your other conference compliance people or other people on your campus trying to get something done. That doesn't come but for experience, and that's where the patience is really, really critical in my mind. And something, like I said, that I sometimes see people getting overlooking as a quality and as a learning experience.
Yeah, Amy, I think that's so true. When I've talked to groups of students either that are coming through the office or outside, it is my number one point that I always end up with is focus on doing the job you have right now really, really well, and opportunities will come. They may not come at the time frame that you want them to come, but they will come. I promise you they will come. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And, I think sometimes people get caught up in not truly understanding whether it's the next level up or maybe even 2 or 3 levels up, uh, the CEOs, the commissioners, the managing directors or vice presidents, if it's the NCAA, they don't truly understand what their day-to-day world is like and what they're dealing with. So how do you as a commissioner maybe instill upon your staff, and in a lot of ways you're fortunate because your staff is a manageable size that you probably have a touch with everybody in there. How do you try and instill some of their fill some of their bucket with what you do on a daily basis, and how that can help them kind of understand where they need to grow moving up the ladder?
Yeah, I do think size of a department is important, or an office in our case. But I think it's transferable, regardless of the organization's 500 people, or like we are 11 people with a couple of interns. For me, what I found is what my bosses and mentors did for me, and that is share information and be transparent and use things, to the extent you can, but provide context so that it is a learning opportunity, whether it's information that you're sharing, or particularly when it's information you can share, and just be honest about that. Like, look, guys, here's some information. Here's what's going on with our prison issue with our presidents. Here's the portion I can tell you about. Here's a portion I can't tell you about, and here's why. And they, when you develop a good relationship, they understand that. And then in 6 months or a year, when the issue is resolved, then you go through a debrief. And so we'll do some things like that. But on most things that are not, highly confidential, I'm pretty transparent with our staff because I want their input. I'm not a subject matter expert in hardly anything anymore. And I don't have all the answers. Might have an idea, and certainly if people ask me for my opinion, I'll give it to them. But I want input from our staff, and I think their ability to provide input and hear from other people, whether it's our social media person and hearing from a compliance person, hearing from a communications person, I think we get to a better result when I share information, ask questions and ask for advice and counsel. And then there's a learning just in the collaborative process in and of itself. But I do think it's important for them to hear what I'm able to share, because they touch it, or they certainly hear about it from coaches or their colleagues in the SID community or compliance community. And to the extent that I can provide some extra framework around that, even without sharing any information, I think has been helpful. And that's what the people I work for and my mentors did for me, is share information and provide, here's why something happened, or here's why it didn't happen. And that was a great learning experience for me. And I'm, so I would like to think that I'm, doing something similar to our staff to help them grow as leaders in their areas.
Yeah, it raises an interesting point. So, for young people getting into the business or looking at maybe that second job, how important do you think work environment, work culture is as they evaluate what that next step is, as opposed to, just by example, the size of the conference or the perception of the size of the conference or competitiveness or the perception of that, the resources in a particular league. So I'm just curious your thoughts on if you're advising a young person looking for that first job or maybe that second job, what you described as something that seems like a very learning-oriented culture, a growth culture for a young professional. That's pretty important, isn't it?
I absolutely think it's important. I mean, everyone has different motivations, so I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way based on whatever your values and motivations are. But I know for me, it was less important to work for the biggest school, the biggest conference, the biggest brand name, particularly coming up. Well, yeah, particularly coming up in compliance. I think maybe if I'm doing social media or communications or I don't know, maybe there's a reason to be involved with a bigger name or something like that. But to your question, to an audience of some people who are in their first, second jobs, I think experience matters more than the brand name, quite honestly, because sometimes, I worked at the ACC back in the day, and I had a great job. I worked for Shane Lyons, who's a great boss, mentor, and friend, but I did compliance, and that was it. And I left the ACC to come to the America East actually as their compliance person because while I was still doing compliance, I had an opportunity to do other things here when I first came through the America East, and that was getting exposed to championships and a whole host of things that I saw other people in the ACC office doing, but I didn't get a chance to work on any of that, and that I think made me a better professional. One, it helped me going back to like the curiosity and exploring and experimenting things. I was curious about working in championships. I thought it looked cool that, people would go to a basketball championship or a golf championship for that example, for that matter, and like, work in that capacity. And I still love doing that. But I found for me, it didn't like get me up in the morning. So I enjoyed it, but for seeing that, I would have always been curious or, maybe been concerned about not getting that experience. So I was able to use that time at the America East in my first time around to experiment and see, okay, I really still do love compliance and governance and policy work. And that led me to the national office. So, I think for me, the experience has always been the most critical, particularly early in my career. And then the other point was who I was working for is really important. And I think that's advice I'd give to anyone in any segment of this profession or any profession. I've been blessed with really great mentors and leaders and Patty Viverito and Shane Lyons and Stan Wilcox, and then all the people at the national office. So I learned as much from those people just in how they did their work, their professionalism, as much as I learned on the subject matter stuff. Like I said before, subject matter stuff in the grand scheme of things is pretty easy. It's studying, it's reading, it's preparing, but it's how the interacting with people is where you can really learn. And I learned that from working with some really great leaders.
Yeah, that's a good segue to something I wanted to ask you, which is, organizations like NAAC, women's leaders, and how do those types of organizations, those professional organizations, help with that networking and that meeting people that you might decide that you want to go work for them because you met them through some type of event with an organization like that? What role do they play, and how would you advise folks to use that resource?
Yeah, I think they're invaluable. I do think networking is critically important. There's a lot of people you can work, especially on a campus. You're surrounded by a lot of people. In the conference office, you're surrounded by less people. So I think the exposure to new ideas, new perspectives, people at different types of schools or different types of conferences, I just don't see how that can be harmful to someone, particularly early in their career. It certainly benefited me. That's how I got my first internship, quite honestly, was going to a delegates reception when I was a student athlete and somehow running into, Lori Abahara, who knew Stan, who later then connected me to Stan Wilcox for my internship. Like that's literally how it happened. So, and other jobs subsequent to that have happened because I've had a chance to know people, either directly or indirectly, because my name's been passed around. And you have to do the work. You still have to obviously be. Networking alone is not going to solve all the problems and move you up the corporate ladder, so to speak. You have to be solid and be an excellent performer. But getting out there and so that people know who you are and you know who they are is really important. To, like you said, identify who maybe you want to work with someday, or at least be a mentor, or ask to be a mentor if you know you're not going to have a chance to go work there someday. So I think that's really important. I'll also say I think you can learn as much from your peers as you can from people who are in more senior positions. That's what I found. That's another thing I loved about when I was in the compliance world, learning from all of the CCACA colleagues. That was just invaluable to be surrounded by that group of people. And then the same thing at the national office, which was a really diverse, competitive group of people. But man, it made me a better professional. More than any experience I've had, that made me sharper and better, and pushed me and challenged me in ways that, like I said, no other experience has, even to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. Before we wrap up here, I do want to ask you on the personal side. You've just completed one of the coolest things I've ever seen anybody do in this business, and that's the MIT Executive MBA program. Have no idea how you were able to pull that off while also working as a commissioner. So, talk a little bit about your motivation for doing that program, and what did it what's transferable that you learned there to your current job, and just talk a little bit about it. I just think it's incredible that you were able to do that.
Yeah, it was, when I look back, I don't know how I did it either. But, then I, walk out of my office and I see the great staff that we have. That certainly made it a lot easier to know that we had good people in the office taking care of stuff, and a supportive membership from our athletic directors to our presidents. I wouldn't have been able to do the program without their support. So I'm really grateful and blessed in that regard, to have had the opportunity to even start it. But the reason for doing it was, going back to what I said earlier, like I'm a curious person. I want to keep growing and learning. And just because I'm a commissioner doesn't mean that I've got it all figured out, or that this is my terminal job for the rest of my life. Like I said earlier, I was fortunate to, get this position sooner than I thought. And so I've spent the last 8 years now that I've had it, 7.5 years that I've had it, really diving into it and learning. But I want to be better. I want to be better commissioner of the America East, or whatever might come down the road for me. And so that's where the MBA was really attractive to me. I think I spent my whole career in college athletics, learned a lot from people, and certainly more to learn. But I need something that was sort of outside and on a different level, and that's what the MBA experience taught me. So there's a whole big world outside of college sports, and for someone who only grew up in college sports, there was a lot for me to learn from a business standpoint, that some of the things we've been able to apply here, just from basic, financial and accounting stuff to strategy, and thinking about strategy and the frameworks behind it in a different way. So yeah, I can't say enough about what I've learned, personally and professionally, about that experience. And it's been it was a good opportunity for me, and I think is going to be good for the America East as well as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, well, just on a personal note, I mean, I think it's great, to listen to you talk about the things that you think are really important for making somebody really successful, and to hear you and see you live that out is a real compliment to you. So, thank you for being the leader that you are, obviously. Any last advice you would provide to folks as we wrap up today?
Um, Having come up in the compliance and governance profession, I think that was, for me, the best training that I could have had to become a commissioner. While I might not spend a lot of my time on those issues, I still am drawn into, sometimes forced into, national issues and NCAA governance issues, and having, again, that fundamental understanding of how this business works is critically important. So I would say to all the compliance folks out there, don't be discouraged by all the different rule changes or this or that, and because that's always going to happen. I've been in this now all 20 years or over 20 years. Don't try not to get caught up in the everyday minutia and the latest topic, because there is a longer play to this, and if you stick with it, you're going to learn so much about how this business works, that if you stay in compliance and governance for your whole career, it's just going to make you better. But if you're interested in stepping out, it's definitely going to make you a better professional in terms of whatever the area you go into. And then, now wearing a different hat, I see things in a different way, that sometimes I think would have made me a better compliance person. So from that, I'll say, make sure you go out and talk to your colleagues on campus or in your conference office or at the national office. Go see what championships people are up to, or event operators are up to, or your event staff or facility staff, communication staff. See what their challenges are, really what their challenges, and how you might all be able to work together to help your campus or your conference. I think that's something that I probably should have done a better job of when I was coming up. And I now see the value of that full department or organizational wide collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's collaboration is key. So again, Amy, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Appreciate you sharing your story and your advice. Appreciate it.
Thank you.